Hello, Betty Croswick here. The title of my post today is Our Banks Are Broke. And I don't mean the system is broken, which it is, but I mean that they actually have no money. And the reason they have no money is because, in my opinion, it's because of the federal fractional banking system. But to get to why this has made our banks broke, started, well, I want to go back to the very beginning of when money was first being used. And, in the beginning, I'm sure you've all read about how, it was snails and shells and beads and sheep and whatever was used as money. But as trade became more prevalent among groups of people, they settled on one item as money, and that was gold. And it wasn't that they used gold as money. Gold became the money, was the money. And as time went on and trade progressed, and there were, you could, certificates were invented. And the certificates were for so many ounces of gold. And the beginning banks would recognize these certificates and change them for gold, and everybody was happy. And actually, that system worked until actually just recently in human history. Uh, and it was wars were fought over gold and silver, and but it was still the idea that certificates representing gold could be redeemed for the gold that the certificate represented. And actually, we were still using this method more or less until March of 1933. That wasn't very long ago, and that gold became a thing in the American consciousness because President Roosevelt, who was really besieged by need for money because the Depression, the Great Depression, was still on, and he needed money. He and his office needed money. They were still building things, providing jobs for people, and a lot of national monuments and dams and railroads and national parks were created during these times. So it took a lot of money. Plus the fact that he was worried about the Europe, what was happening in Europe. He didn't like that very much as heading towards trouble. He felt his military should be wrapped up. So he said, well, they and his cabinet, they looked and said, well, they can't borrow more money because they were restrained by law, that they couldn't borrow more money than they had gold in the reserve to back it. So they decided, well, what they would do is just go off the gold standard and because they had to have this money, and they were also helping other nations, try to rebuild some of their internal wars and that had been going on. So they were spending a lot of money, and they needed the money, and so they went off the gold standard. That was their decision, and so they borrowed a lot of money, as did the other nations involved in the war. All of the nations were heavily, heavily in debt by the time the World War II ended. But just before it ended, there were the U.S. led the trend to have the nations come together and do a think tank, because all of this debt was not, it was destabilizing everything at the monetary system. So they got together at a place called Bretton Woods, a little town in New Hampshire, U.S. There were 44 nations who came together, and they said, well, not being on the gold standard, it's not all of that advantageous at this point, because we're kind of in a mess here and we need to be stabilized. And so their decision was the 44 nations would peg the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency, and but the currency, U.S. currency, would be pegged to the price of gold. So they were, as I understand it, quite back into the gold-backed dollar. And so this seemed to settle down, the economies were going back to showing signs of life and growing and being reasonably peaceful. And although there were, the United States was getting too big for its britches in a way. It was showing some belligerence within the boundaries of other countries. It didn't recognize the sovereignty of some countries too much. But anyway, it worked after a fashion until 1973. And that's when Richard Nixon, again, who didn't like the restraints of having gold, the gold price, lead what the financial world was going to be doing, and who wanted to, he was annoyed by the constraints of having to check the gold price or look at the U.S. vault and see how much gold they had before he laid out his own plans of what he was going to do. So he took the economy back off the gold standard, and began to use the fractional reserve system. And of course, other countries followed suit, as the United States was the undisputed leader of the Western world at that point, anyway. But the mechanism he used was the Federal Reserve fractional system, and a fractional system it was Nixon didn't invent this system. It was invented, I think, by a Frenchman, but really not used widely before. But Nixon began to use it because it suited his ambitions and his worldview. Was that the fractional system says that you must leave. It does not go back, but you must leave a fraction of the bank's intakes into a reserve so that money will be there if people want, whenever people want their money or want to borrow money or want to do whatever with money. They must have, and the amount settled on that had to be in the reserve was 10% of what they deposited into the bank had to be held in reserve. And this was okay. This was pretty good, and when it was going, because people felt assured because they paid into the reserve system that they knew the bank took this 10% off and held it there, and they felt secure in it. And but the problem with it was that it wasn't always adhered to, and it wasn't always adhered to, or wasn't as much as 10%. It would go up and down. Banks are sketchy creatures. The bankers, they're not necessarily a very good breed. Maybe they should just close all the banks and let people barter as they used to. I'm being facetious there, but anyway, it wasn't working too well. It came to the point where it just the money wasn't getting in there that should have been getting in there. And then the U.S. National Reserve Board announced on March the 15th, 2020, that the required reserve for deposits had been reduced to zero. That's right, folks, zero. They went for holding 10% in reserve for every deposit to zero. So there's no money in the Federal Reserve for the people or for anybody, probably. It just isn't there. The banks are broke. Now, we heard last Friday that 3 banks had failed in the U.S., but Janet Yellen and President Biden came out and said, "Oh, we're going to backstop them, these banks. We're not going to let them fail. We're going to make sure they survive and thrive." And we call it, it's not a bailout. No, it's not like it was bailouts. People know they wind up paying for bailouts and bail-ins and all kinds of veils that the banks come up with. They're really talking about people's money, tax, and other forms of confiscation from the poor people to be herded into the hands of the rich. And anyway, the banks are broke. And how they're going to be fixed is anybody's guess. Now, my feeling is that the International Monetary Fund, they don't want this fixed. In fact, I think they probably had a big hand in creating this with their young leaders like Justin Trudeau and the Netherlands young fellow and Chrystia Freeland and you know, and the Soros people, and they all come together, and Bill Gates is a big player, and so they're zealots. They want uh, they want a pristine climate for themselves, and if they have too many people on Earth, they're messing up their pristine climate. That's what they think, and they want to get rid of at least half, and they're Malthusians. They follow this guy who years and years ago said that, oh, the Earth would be overpopulated by this time we should all be dying of everything. And we may be starting to do this, die of everything, because the forces that be, they're with all the train wrecks and the fertilizer shortages and the medicine shortages and food shortages, and it's all very suspicious. And I actually believe they have been trying and will continue to try to just get rid of us in the most mundane ways, starve us to death or drive us crazy. Mental health is not the best across the nations. And anyway, enough of this. Next time I want to talk about what perhaps we can do about some of this. So next time, okay? Thank you. Goodbye. See you next time. All right? Let me now see how I get out of this. Okay?